Arlo and Frank, listen, today I want to talk to you about my grandparents on my dad's side. My grandfather and grandmom Clark. Now I never met my grandfather. That's why I don't have a nickname, Grandpa, Papa, something like that. Opa, because he probably died more than 10 years before I was born. So everything that I know about him, I know from my parents. My grandfather worked in a factory. During the Depression, he got laid off and it was hard to find work. So my dad, your great-grandfather, great-grandpa Clark used to eat lettuce sandwiches sometimes because that's all the food that they could get. And so there were a lot of stories about the Depression, but also he was a baseball player in, I guess there was some sort of industrial league. So he played. Now people have baseball and softball teams at their work, but it's just recreational. But these guys actually got paid. I used to have some clippings from the newspaper of box scores where, he hit a home run or something. It was supposed to have been pretty good. I also may still have a baseball cap of his that was disintegrating when I was a kid. So I'm sure right now it's probably just dust, but it might be in a box someplace up in the attic. I know I still had it when we were in Miami. And he died when he was 41 years old. So my dad, when he was 40, was worried that he was going to go early too. I don't know what my grandfather died from, but my mom told me a story that she went to see him. She loved him a lot. And in the hospital, when he was dying, he said, when you come to my funeral, don't cry because I'm not there. I will have left for a better place. So I think that someday I'm gonna get to see my grandfather again when I get to heaven. Now my grandmom, I knew very well. In fact, your dads, Frank and Tom, only knew one of their great-grandparents, and that was the woman that they called great-grandmom, that I called grandmom, and it's your great-great-grandmom. She died when she was maybe 96, 97 years old. She worked until the time, right around when she turned 90, I think. She worked at a place called the Penn Widows Home. She would walk there in the morning. She worked 5 days a week. And she would help take care of what she called them old ladies, who a lot of them were 20 years younger than her. She would bring food home almost every day. Whatever they had for lunch that day, we would have in the refrigerator. So we might have it the next day at lunch, and sometimes that would be dinner. I'm sure she didn't make a lot of money, so whatever she could bring home was supplementing us. We didn't have a ton of money when I was growing up. We were okay. My parents had a house at the shore, but they bought that from war bonds that they cashed in after the Second World War. Now, my grandparents, who I'm talking about today, were actually millennials. I never thought about this until I started preparing for this little talk. But they weren't from the year 2000, they were from the year 1900. They were both born either in the late 1800s or the early 1900s. And the world was a lot different back then. My grandmother was Victorian. She had a brother who was kind of an odd duck. His name was Wes. One of the reasons he was an odd duck, and I won't go into the particulars of how odd a duck he was, but he was dressed as a girl when he was a little boy because he had spindly legs. And that was something that they would do. They would just say, oh, this boy is going to get beat up by the other boys, so we'll just dress him as a girl. And different time. I thought, was a complete idiot when I was young. But as I got older, I realized that she had her good points. And everybody has their bad points. My mom, your great-grandmother, your great-nana, she hated her. She loved her father-in-law, but she hated her mother-in-law. And the two of them lived together. We lived in my grandmom's house until I was about 12 or 13 years old, right around when I started high school. We lived 2352 East Dauphin Street in a neighborhood called Kensington in Philadelphia. So I'm a Kenzo, and your dads actually are Kenzos too. They didn't spend as much time in the neighborhood as I did, but they went to school there for several years. So they qualify as Kenzos. It's a pejorative term, but I wear it as a badge of honor because Kenzos aren't supposed to make anything of themselves except get into barroom brawls and drink a lot. So I only do one of those things. I remember my grandmom coming home when I was a kid, when we still lived on Dauphin Street. She wore these, we called them granny boots. They were boots that seemed almost up to her knees. And she was tiny. She was probably 4'8". And these boots seemed like they were 2 feet high. They weren't. But they came up and they tied. They had laces that tied, I think, on the sides. So it probably took her about half an hour to get her boots on in the morning and get them off in the afternoon. But in the house, she would walk like bump, 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 bump on the hardwood floors. But out on the street, you'd see her coming, and she'd have her bag with the food in it. And then when we moved from there to 2176 East York Street, she still worked, and she still walked to work. By that time, I wasn't playing in the front yard. We didn't even have a front yard like we did on Dauphin Street. So I didn't get to see her come home. But she would walk home. And not only that, the third floor of the house on York Street was her floor. It had its own kitchen and I think 2 bedrooms, may have even had 3 bedrooms. And she took care of that. My mom never went up there. I don't think my mom knew even what was up there because she hated her. She even hated her when she was 96, right before she died. And my grandmom really didn't like my mom either. Probably some stuff happened way before I was born that I don't even care about. But my grandmom would walk up and down the steps to the third floor and back several times a day. She used to have her own breakfast upstairs in the morning, but she would come down for lunch and she would come down for dinner and sit with the family. She had to climb a lot of steps. The house on York Street was enormous. It had 12-foot ceilings on the first floor, 10-foot ceilings on the second floor, and 8-foot ceilings on the third floor. But that doesn't matter because you don't have to climb the third floor. Frank and Tom would call her to dinner. They'd go, "Great Grandmom, time to dinner." And she'd go, "Okay, boys." Bump, 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 bump. Don't worry, I'm not going to do all of the steps. I don't know how many steps there were from the second floor to the third floor. I know there were 21 steps from the second floor to the first floor. And the reason is because one time your great-grandpa, Clark, was going to take your dads down to Stone Harbor to hang out with your great-nana. And he fell down the steps head first because he fell. And he didn't die because he knew how to fall. But he slid down the steps head first. And it came to the bottom of the steps, and Frank and Tom came up and said, "Are you okay, Grandpa?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm okay." 21. What? 21 steps. I counted them on the way down. But great-grandmom, the person your dad called great-grandmom, was really a character in her own right. She called me Frankie. "Frankie, don't forget to put your goulashes on and your raincoat. It's supposed to be some rain today." She said some things to me that I just thought were lunacy when she said them. Then I realized later that she had a point. One of them was when Marcia, my ex-wife, and your actual biological grandmother, when we brought Frankie home from the hospital after he was born. Now, Marcia had already had your Uncle Sam, so she knew all about having a baby and what you had to do, changing the diapers. And my mom had 3 kids, so she knew all that stuff. But Marcia, I think, was up taking a nap, and my mom was out doing something, running an errand. So it was just me and my grandmom and Frankie, newborn Frankie. He started to cry. He didn't need to be changed. He didn't want anything to eat. And my grandmom said, "Listen, Frankie, he's just having a bad day." And I said, "What the hell are you talking about? He's a baby. How could he have a bad day?" And she said, "Well, he's not just a baby. He's a tiny human being. And he can have a bad day just like a full-grown human being." And I said, You're crazy, Grandma." Then later on, after she was dead, and I couldn't go back and apologize to her, I realized, yeah, she was probably right. Another thing that she used to say to me all the time was, Jesus loves you. And you need to put your faith in him and ask him for his forgiveness. And I used to say, Grandmom, that's a fairy tale. I don't believe in fairy tales. And she said, no, Frankie, it's not a fairy tale. She was right. She was right. In 1996, I got saved. And I don't even remember if she was gone then. I think she was. But I'll get to meet her again someday. And my grandfather, I'll meet him for the first time. And I'll have some apologizing to do and a lot of hugging. Peace out, guys. Till next time.